Now let's take a look at the treatment of residual value for the lessor. In the same example that we discussed earlier for the lessee, in transaction between Caterpillar and Sterling, where Caterpillar is the lessor, we have Sterling guarantees residual value of $5,000. When we compute the rental payments, the present value of residual value was subtracted from the fair value of the backhoe. Why is that? Because this is the amount that is guaranteed, and again, this will not matter if the expected residual value is higher or lower, it doesn't matter. We will take the present value of the full guaranteed residual value and subtract it from the fair value of the lease equipment. Now, the remaining amount that we have is the amount to be recovered through the lease payments. Okay? Now, if you decide to use your financial calculators, you will have to do this in two steps. First, you will have to figure out the present value of your residual value and then subtract it from the fair value. And then only take the amount that is left and assume that this is the present value of your lease payments. So basically two steps. First present value and then another present value again. So we have roughly $96,000 that must be recovered through 5 payments that qualify to be as an annuity due. So you will take your roughly $1,000 and divide it by the present value factor for the annuity due like it is set up here. This is how we solve for the rental payments. And again, this computation will be the same whether residual values are guaranteed or not guaranteed. The only difference when you don't have to worry about this amount, if the problem will say specifically there is no residual value whatsoever. But if you have guaranteed or non-guaranteed, the calculation of the payments will be the same. Now this write-up might be a little bit intimidating, but once we put it with the numbers, you will understand what's going on. If you have unguaranteed residual value for the lessor will recognize sales revenue and cost of goods sold for the portion of the assets for which the recovery is assured, meaning you can only do it for the rent payments. And we cannot yet, because the residual value is unguaranteed, we cannot assume that that particular amount is sold. It basically does not fulfill the requirements for revenue recognition just yet. Therefore, both sales revenue and cost of goods sold must be reduced by the present value of this unguaranteed residual value. But gross profit will equal to be the same. Let's take a look at the table. So unguaranteed residual value, if you compare a sales type lease with guaranteed residual value, the same facts. Sales price is $100,000, expected residual value is $5,000, present value of which is roughly $4,100, and lease equipment has $85,000 cost to the dealer, Caterpillar. So let's take a look. We will have to calculate lease receivable in this fashion. So for the receivable part, $100,000 is fair value of your equipment, and the lease receivable will be calculated as present value of all lease payments plus present value of the residual value, guaranteed or not guaranteed. Both calculations will be the same. Now, sales price. If we have a guaranteed residual value, we assume the sales price or your revenue will be $100,000. Under unguaranteed residual value, we assume that this part, the present value of unguaranteed residual value, has not been sold yet. And then for the cost of goods sold, it's $85,000 versus it's slightly less by the same present value of unguaranteed residual value. And if you look at the very bottom, your gross profit is still the same, $15,000. Okay, here's a comparative slide, and please keep this one handy because it really gives it step by step, and you can look at the comparison under both slides. I could see that guaranteed residual value on the left side, your sales revenue is 100,000, and then cost of goods sold is 85. That gives you that $15,000 of gross profit. And the sales revenue matches your lease receivable, $100,000. And then inventory matches your cost of goods sold, $85,000. The rest of the journal entries will be as we typically did it before. No problem there. You will run amortization schedule and then recognize the lease receivable and go all the way down until finally you get the inventory back, right? And in this case, if there was any kind of difference and the lessee, Sterling, had to pay additional $2,000 because the expected residual value ended up being less than the guaranteed, so Caterpillar received $2,000. Basically, you can compare this journal entry to the Sterling's. That will be very, very similar. But if you look under the unguaranteed residual value, you can see that your lease revenue, lease receivable doesn't match sales revenue. Okay, so the journal entry that you used to do for the inventory, for the sales, for the perpetual inventory system, it's two steps, one for the sales and receivable, and then another one for the inventory cost of goods sold. That one, it's not going to work, right? Because these two do not agree, and then cost of goods sold doesn't match the inventory part. How interesting is that? But still, it is in balance because we take the present value of unguaranteed residual value from both the revenue and cost of goods sold. Then the rest is very, very similar to the guaranteed residual value until we get at the very end up here. We still take inventory back on our books at $3,000, but because the lessee did not guarantee residual value, they will not pay us any cash like it happened here, and we will have to recognize a loss on the lease. Okay, this final slide is worth a price of gold. I have both a lessee and a lessor, and I'm going to go ahead and concentrate only on the lessor part. So if we have whether unguaranteed or guaranteed residual value, you could see that guaranteed residual value is included in the classification test, so we will include present value of guaranteed residual value, and when we calculate the receivable, it will be included as well. If you look under the unguaranteed residual value column, we will ignore it for the classification test. However, we will take it into consideration to measure our receivable. Okay, it's very important to understand. Okay, so again, you have to keep this handy when you do any kind of problems when there is any kind of residual value. If there's no residual value, you don't have to worry about it. But if you have unguaranteed or guaranteed, I would say keep this handy and make sure that you know which party are you doing the books for, the lessee or the lessor, so you don't get confused.